One winter day in 1986, in a quiet hospital in Philadelphia, a young woman lay still on a hospital bed. The stage lights were gone, the cameras no longer flashing, and no one called her name in admiration anymore. She passed away quietly at the age of 26, carrying with her a past that once blazed like fire and consumed her just the same. Her name was Gia Carangi, and perhaps you've never heard it. But before Cindy, Naomi, or Linda were ever called supermodels, there was a girl with Italian roots, ocean, deep, sorrowful eyes, and an untamable, rebellious spirit. Gia wasn't just a model, she was a wild icon, the embodiment of freedom, desire, and self-destruction. They called her the first supermodel of the 1982nd, but no one knew whether to cry or be angry at how she disappeared. A star that once burned brightly, then vanished into nothingness, as if she had never existed. What could make a legend like Gia Carangi disappear? The answer begins here. Gia Marie Carangi was born on the 29th of January, 1960, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Joe Carangi, a bakery owner of Italian descent, and Kathleen Adams, a classically beautiful American woman with an unpredictable, volatile temperament. Gia grew up in a home far from peaceful. Her parents constantly argued, smashed things, and erupted in endless fights, familiar scenes inside that small, chaotic house. From a young age, Gia sensed the world around her was unsafe. When she was just 11, her mother left home, abandoning her children to a man she no longer loved. That departure wasn't just a family breakup, it was the first crack in the fragile soul of a girl who longed to be loved but always felt left behind. Years later, Gia confessed, "I always felt abandoned, even in the middle of a crowd." In that stormy environment, Gia turned to music as an escape. She was drawn to David Bowie, not just for his music, but because he stood for rebellion, fluid sexuality, and defiance of convention. Gia felt a kindred spirit. While her classmates still tried to blend in, Gia dyed her hair, wore piercings, and dressed in full-on rock and roll. She had no desire to please anyone, she only wanted to be herself. But that uniqueness made her a target. At Abraham Lincoln High School, Gia was bullied. She was mocked for her strange fashion choices, for the way she looked, people in the eye with a bold, direct gaze that seemed to challenge everything around her. Yet that same stare left some people spellbound. There was something wild and deeply vulnerable in the way Gia existed, like a flower blooming in the desert, breathtaking, but always at risk of being crushed. Gia had no interest in academics. She skipped classes, doodled in textbooks, and spent her time dreaming of another place somewhere without judgment, where she could live by instinct. As a teenager, she began hanging out with outcasts, queer kids, trans kids, people on the margins. She never questioned their identities, she simply felt they were authentic, and she belonged among them more than anywhere else. If there was one thing that made her stand out early on, it was her honesty. Gia didn't know how to fake it. When she was happy, she beamed. When she was sad, she folded into herself like a child. That raw purity in a world full of masks made her exceptional, but also heartbreakingly fragile. No one, not even Gia herself, ever imagined she would become a model. At just 5'8", with messy brown hair and a wild, intense gaze, she didn't fit the industry's beauty mold of the time. And yet, it was precisely that unpolished, magnetic presence that changed her life in an instant. It all began when Gia was 17. A close gay friend named Eric encouraged her to do a casual photo shoot at a small studio in Philadelphia. He saw something in her, something raw, something the camera couldn't ignore. The resulting photos were far from polished, harsh lighting, awkward poses. But when Gia looked into the lens, something happened. It was as if she stared straight through it, stripping away any barrier between her and the viewer. She didn't smile. She didn't fake. She was simply herself, pure instinct, unfiltered. Eric sent the photos to Wilhelmina Models, one of the top agencies in New York at the time. Against all odds, they called back. They couldn't explain it. But there was something inexplicably magnetic about this unknown girl from Philly. They had to meet her. Gia's first trip to New York was overwhelming. The city pulsed with speed and indifference. The casting rooms were cold, filled with girls who looked perfect, walked flawlessly, and carried themselves like machines. Gia was different. She didn't know how to walk the runway, didn't understand how to pose. She simply stood there, stared, and let her energy speak for her. Wilhelmina Cooper, the legendary founder of the agency, was the first to truly see Gia's potential. "This girl will drive people crazy," she reportedly said. Wilhelmina didn't care about Gia's inexperience. She saw a raw diamond. She immediately placed Gia in private development sessions and introduced her to top photographers like Francesco Scavullo and Chris von Wangenheim, the men who would help define Gia's image. At the time, Gia was still confused. She didn't understand why people called her special. To her, she was just reacting emotionally to the camera. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply wanted to feel like she had a place to belong, even if that place was inside a photograph. Gia's family, particularly her father, didn't pay much attention to her modeling ambitions. He dismissed it as superficial. Her mother, after years of estrangement, saw it as a chance for her daughter to escape. But for Gia, it all still felt like a hazy adventure, one filled with curiosity, fear, and a deep, persistent loneliness. Then, almost suddenly, Gia's photos began to circulate. She appeared in editorials for Harper's Bazaar, and then Vogue. Her untouched face, full lips, wild hair, and that haunting gaze, unmistakable, became a phenomenon. New York whispered about a wild girl from Philly. Opportunity hit like a whirlwind. And Gia, though she didn't fully understand what she was entering, stepped into that storm guided only by her instincts. By the late 1972nd, the fashion world was shifting. Traditional beauty standards were being challenged, and top fashion houses were hungry for a new face, a symbol of rebellion, freedom, and edge. Gia Carangi appeared like a storm no one saw coming. Within just a year of signing with Wilhelmina Models, Gia had reached heights most models only dreamt of. She became the face of campaigns for Armani, Versace, Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, and most notably, Chanel, where Karl Lagerfeld once called her a living myth. But what made Gia unforgettable wasn't the contracts or the clothes. It was her presence. On the catwalk, Gia didn't walk, she glided. Her steps felt natural, like they belonged to her alone. Her gaze wasn't cold or distant like other models of the time. It was emotional, sad, defiant, sometimes lonely. When she walked for Gianni Versace, the room went silent. No one knew her name yet, but everyone felt they'd witnessed something rare. In April 1979, Vogue US placed her on the cover, a milestone for a girl who'd been virtually unknown just 18 months earlier. Photographed by Chris von Wangenheim, Gia wore a leather jacket with no shirt underneath, staring directly at the camera, not seductive, not guarded, just raw. Critics called the image provocative, melancholic, and undeniably real. Photographer Francesco Scavullo, who had worked with countless stars, once said, "Gia didn't pose she lived inside the photograph. She wasn't acting, she was revealing." In shoots, Gia wasn't afraid of nudity, of scars, of vulnerability. She didn't perform, she opened up, and that was her power. Her mystique extended beyond the set. Off-duty, Gia was all attitude, punk rock leather, cigarettes, men's jackets, boots. She didn't attend elite parties, didn't fake charm for the press. She smoked, swore, and kissed her girlfriends openly on the street. In an industry built on illusion, Gia's honesty was a revolution. She was also one of the few models at the time to openly express bisexuality. Though she never gave interviews about it, she didn't hide her relationships, especially her complicated romance with makeup artist Sandy Linter. Their love story, passionate, stormy, and painful, became an integral part of Gia's mythology. Her peak didn't last long, but it burned with unmatched intensity. In less than 3 years, Gia appeared on over 20 Vogue covers, hundreds of editorials, and was chased by every top photographer. She embodied an era and served as a warning for those lost in its glare. Gia Carangi never conformed to any mold the fashion industry tried to create. In a world where models were trained to stay quiet and act as blank canvases for designers, Gia was a fire, brilliant, impulsive, and uncontrollable. She didn't follow the usual path of a model. Gia refused to sign exclusive contracts. She wouldn't tone down her style or behavior just to please a brand. Once, she turned down a major fashion house that asked her to cover her tattoo with concealer. For Gia, every scar, every mark on her body was part of her truth, and hiding it would mean hiding herself. While other models carefully curated a public image, ice queen or seductress, Gia chose raw honesty. She smoked on set, burst into laughter during photo shoots, got angry when criticized, and cried openly when emotions overwhelmed her. No one taught her how to be a model, and no one taught her how to hide. In one rare interview, Gia said, "I don't understand why people pretend they're okay. If I'm tired, I'll say it. If I'm lonely, I'll hug someone. I don't know how to act." That unfiltered honesty made people love her, but also label her as difficult. Her difference also lay in her sexuality, still taboo at the time. She never publicly declared herself gay or bisexual, but never hid her relationships with women either. In an industry obsessed with polished femininity, Gia shattered expectations, fierce, wild, and beyond labels. Her love affair with makeup artist Sandy Linter was more than a relationship. It was one of the few safe spaces where Gia felt seen and loved. But because their love had no place in the public eye, it was also full of heartbreak. Gia would write desperate, messy letters to Sandy, like a child begging to hold on to the only thing that made her feel alive. Beneath all the defiance was a girl full of contradictions. Gia despised the industry's fakeness, yet needed it to survive. She hated being objectified, yet was addicted to being seen. On multiple shoots, she walked out midway, feeling controlled. Once, she slapped a creative director who made crude comments about her body. She wasn't a muse. She was a rebel. And because of that, the fashion world began to push her out. Designers feared her unpredictability. Top photographers grew wary after she missed shoots or disappeared entirely. In an industry built on control and compliance, Gia, no matter how stunning, was a liability. But if you ask what made Gia a legend, it was her refusal to compromise. She didn't enter fashion to become an icon. She simply lived truthfully, and that, in a sea of masks, was rare. From the peak of fame to the depths of despair, Gia Carangi's descent happened so fast, no one, not even she, could catch it in time. While her name still graced fashion's biggest magazines, inside, Gia was collapsing into loneliness, confusion, and addiction. No one knows exactly when drugs entered Gia's life. Maybe it was at an after-party, a quick hit to relieve pressure, or just a casual experiment. But once she crossed that line, there was no turning back. Gia began using heroin, at first to escape the overwhelming demands of stardom, and then as a daily survival mechanism. Photo shoots became chaotic. Gia arrived late, eyes glazed, sometimes falling asleep in the makeup chair. Once, she passed out during a major fashion campaign, sending the entire crew into panic. Photographer Chris von Wangenheim, once her greatest champion, stopped working with her. Brands pulled out. In fashion, there's no space for fragility. Gia was now labeled a problem. Then came a devastating blow. In 1980, Wilhelmina Cooper, the woman who discovered and mentored Gia, died of cancer. With her gone, Gia lost her anchor. She moved to Ford Models but clashed with their structured, emotionless environment. Agency head Eileen Ford called her unmanageable. Her career spiraled. Ad campaigns disappeared. Magazine covers stopped. She no longer walked runways. Slowly, her name faded. Only rumors remained. Gia in rehab. Gia arrested. Gia waitressing in a lesbian bar. In 1983, she entered a rehabilitation center. She tried to recover, wrote in journals, took part-time jobs, made efforts to rebuild. But the damage was deep. After a brief period of sobriety, she relapsed. Her body deteriorated quickly. In one of her final photo shoots, a jeans campaign, her once radiant face was hollow, her eyes haunted. The beauty that once captivated the world had become a ghost of itself. By late 1985, Gia was hospitalized for severe pneumonia, but was later diagnosed with AIDS, a near-certain death sentence at that time, still shrouded in stigma. She became one of the first famous people in America to die from AIDS, but the media said little. There was no glamorous funeral, no tribute in Vogue. She passed quietly, as if the world had chosen to forget she ever existed. In her personal journal, Gia once wrote, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid no one will remember me after I'm gone." And for a long time, that's exactly what happened. The name Gia Carangi vanished from fashion's memory, erased like a bad dream the industry didn't want to relive. Gia Carangi died at just 26, leaving behind not only an unfinished career, but an unanswered question. If she had lived, would the world have treated her differently? She never had the chance to tell her story. But time, like an invisible editor, has slowly pieced together what she left behind. From the wild, aching stare on the cover of Vogue to the unseen tears beyond the frame, Gia redefined what it meant to be a supermodel. She wasn't just a clothes hanger. She was a storyteller through her body, her pain, her truth. Today, many remember Gia as a forgotten icon. But perhaps it is that very brevity that made her image eternal, like a photograph caught mid-moment, raw and unedited, yet powerful enough to haunt. Maybe Gia Carangi didn't disappear. Maybe we simply stopped remembering her.